Hello, my name is Michaela Kassen, and I am a researcher at Australia's National Research Institution, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. I have worked in pro-poor value chains in agri-food systems for almost 20 years, starting in the east coast of Africa and now in the Asia Pacific. Since coming to CSIRO, my focus has been on agri-food innovation systems and how through a process-oriented approach we can catalyze innovation in the food system that is locally led. Value chains are a core part of this approach that we take at CSIRO. I will start my presentation by putting value chains in the context of Pacific food systems. I hope that you will have seen this document developed by SPC in 2021, which was an evidence brief on the Blue Pacific food systems for the United Nations Food Systems Summit Dialogues. It highlights the importance of the Pacific food systems, especially your blue economy, to both food security within your countries but globally. However, you are facing many challenges to achieve equitable and sustainable food systems that support healthy ecosystems and people. Livelihoods from agriculture and fisheries are declining. Women and youth are not effectively engaged, and there are increasing shocks and disruptors from climate change, sea level rise, declining biodiversity, increasing water security, people migrating, and market shocks. Value chains are central to your food system from production all the way through to consumption. Highlighted in this document are some key aspects to changing food systems for the Pacific. The first aspect identified was systems thinking and practice as the foundation for all game-changing solutions. This is in order to transform ecosystems and human health and well-being. The second is maintaining global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid the most severe impacts of climate change and to ensure the ongoing viability of Pacific food systems. The third aspect highlighted is the scaling approaches for the adaptation of coastal fisheries, aquaculture, ocean farming, and agriculture. This also includes the nexus of food, energy, water, and ecosystems to scale up at community levels across atolls and ecosystem-based approaches to fisheries management and adaptation. The fourth aspect was reorganizing trade systems to enable equitable health and environmental outcomes from food systems. These trade systems need to be compatible with the health needs and priorities of the countries and not jeopardize environmental systems. The global trade systems need to benefit the Pacific Islands. The fifth one is transforming agriculture through agroecological nature-based solutions that leverage Pacific knowledge and expertise. And the final one is maintaining and augmenting strong tuna fishery governance as a major food system activity. Pressure is growing on these systems as well as their distribution, and it's going to be critical to invest in ensuring food supplies of this important shared resource are able to supplement the diet of Pacific people. And the final one is maximizing ocean resources for future generations. This is because land is limited in the Pacific, and you have a large ocean potential for innovation, technologies, and solutions. These will need to be developed with strong Pacific knowledge and voice and engagement, and to support developing the expertise in aquaculture and coastal systems to maximize oceanic resources for food systems. So why are we talking about value chains? Value chains are central to food systems because they form the backbone of how food is produced, processed, distributed, and consumed. They link product to consumer, and they are integral to ensuring the food systems function efficiently, sustainably, and equitably. They allow you to take a systems approach, and depending on what you want to understand, you can unpack that component across the whole value chain, or in one component, or with just one actor, like the private sector. They are vital for improving efficiency and competitiveness, ensuring food security so that supply is more stable. They promote sustainability, ensuring waste is minimized, resources are used efficiently or minimally, such as water resources. Biodiversity is protected or managed. There is reduction in carbon. And this is less of an issue in the Pacific, but is a huge issue, for example, in Australia. Value chains drive economic development, such as income and job creation, help with livelihood diversification, and generally strengthen the economy. They create more social impact through equitable inclusion, such as certification. They ensure quality and safety and build customer trust. And if done correctly, interventions are able to help adapt to global challenges through catalyzing innovation and technology adoption. Value chain analysis is one of the key tools to understand the multifaceted nature of how actors interact and create value, and what the opportunities and barriers may be to designing solutions together. Underpinning value chains has always been economic imperative. Traditional value chains have focused on being efficient and competitive. However, focus is now on what we call triple bottom line, the socio-economic and environmental outcomes. And this is very challenging to achieve. How do we achieve low impact on the environment while also enhancing equity or resilience? Is it even possible? Some value chain researchers, as well as businesses and governments, are asking questions around what are the trade-offs to achieve sustainability in value chains, and a lot of CSIRO's work is on this. Part of CSIRO's work in the Asia Pacific is looking at what traditional value chains look like and what are the differences between inclusive value chains. Traditionally, value is seen as an outcome of economic activity. However, the poor and a lot of people in the Asia Pacific draw different forms of value from participation, which is not necessarily the economic activity alone. Value is realized via consumer needs. This is the traditional assumption. However, the poor are also consumers of their own crops and fish. Inefficiency is a problem. How the poor contribute may come across as inefficient in the context of the whole change because efficiency is not their goal, nor do they have resources to achieve it. There is a focus on different forms of relationships across the value chain, but it tends to be much more linear. However, in inclusive value chains, the types of relationships that the poor can benefit from need to be assessed and not assumed. For traditional value chains, there is a huge assumption that there needs to be a fit. In the context of Asia Pacific, the vision and aspirations of the population are likely to be different to others in the value chain, driven by the value they want out of their participation. And this can often relate to things like wanting to have their kids educated or to ensure their health. Traditional value chains assume that there is a multitude of support functions. These support functions include infrastructure and finance. However, when you're working in fragile contexts or poor contexts, support functions are also crucial to create and to enable the environment for participation. When looking at these, you can see that creating sustainable and resilient value chains needs to take a different approach, and one that meets producer aspirations and balances some of these contradictions to move the system forward. And finally, for me, the benefit of doing value chain analysis is that it is a multi-stakeholder process. It is like building a boat. You need a lot of different people. It helps to co-create knowledge with decision makers across the system. It helps us understand the context and the multiple ways of doing and interacting in value chains, as well as the goals of different actors, which can be competing and contradictory. It allows for ongoing learning and frequent interactions between players, building trust and rapport. And it is definitely not a process to be done alone. So now I will talk to you about what are value chains. A value chain is conventionally defined as the range of activities required to bring a product from the production or harvest to the final consumer. These activities add value to the product as it moves along the chain. Kaplinsky and Morris have been researchers who first formalized the concept of value chains and value chain analysis. They are often referred to when talking about value chain analysis. Some value chains are local. Think, for example, of cassava grown in the gardens and sold at the local market, whilst others are global, such as mud crabs, which are caught in mangroves and often exported to international markets. Tuna is another example. Usually, activities along the value chain aim to add value to the product by processing. Think, for example, of the process of drying sea cucumbers into pêche de mer or drying fish, or moving the product along the value chain. These activities include production, processing, transportation, storage, and consumption. What is important to note is that these activities are conducted within diverse and complex social networks, which influence how the value chain functions. As you can see from this diagram, the value chain goes from the producers, in this example, women who harvest marine products, to the end market. That can be both domestic, such as local markets, and restaurants, or international if the products are exported. As we mentioned, the value chain is part of a broader context within its enabling and constraining factors of the socioeconomic, political, and cultural system, as well as the biophysical environment. Here we can introduce some terms which are commonly used when talking about value chains and value chain analysis. The term actors refers to the people or the group of people such as fishers, farmers, middlemen, and traders, and so on, who are directly involved in the value chain. These actors are linked amongst themselves through the flow of product, money, and information. And you can see this in the diagram flowing from left to right in terms of product flow, but information and money flow is often flowing in the opposite direction and is multidimensional. So now that we have defined value chains, we can explore why we analyze value chains. Usually we analyze value chains to understand how the value chain works, such as the value-adding activities taking place along the chain. In this picture, you can see women and children cleaning pêche de mer or sea cucumber to sell to international markets, or to understand the flow of money and information and points of economic gain and loss along the chain. It can also be used to understand the points of disruption or inefficiency and opportunities. We also want to understand how the socioeconomic, political, and cultural systems in which the value chains operate influence the value chains. We might be particularly interested in the governance, which is the management of resources, and what is going on between actors, the power relationships, and what keeps actors together, and how relationships evolve. What roles specific population groups such as women and youth play, and increasingly how disabled and vulnerable households can play a more active role in the value chain. This information is particularly important to know, especially when trying to implement interventions on value chains to build their resilience to external drivers of change, or design specific interventions that can increase inclusion and equality for women, youth, disabled, and poorer households. And you will hear more about this later in this course. We may also want to understand some of the external factors that influence the viability of value chains, such as how resources are being used, and is climate change impacting these. We may also want to understand the sustainability of the system, such as waste management and waste reduction. We also want to understand the barriers and constraints actors in the value chain face, and the opportunities that can help improve the efficiency of value chains operations and their resilience. Value chain analysis is also useful to identify and develop higher value end markets, which can enhance the livelihoods of producers and other actors, but still being aware that this may create exclusion. Last but not least, value chain analysis can be used to understand actors' challenges resulting from drivers of change, including climate, and ways to enhance the value chain's resilience to future risks. Actor behavior can be from start of the value chain all the way to end consumers and what they want. An example is increasing demand for nutritious food or quality and safety standards. These then are pushed back down the value chain and create opportunities and disincentives or exclusion. A method that is often used when doing a value chain analysis is value chain mapping. Value chain mapping is an effective analysis process that is used to create a visual diagram of the value chain using data and information on the horizontal and vertical dimensions of the value chain. So here we will introduce other terms that are common when doing a value chain analysis. The vertical dimension of a value chain includes all the components of the value chain itself, and we have seen that these components include the actors involved, the value-adding activities, the flow of money and information, and the points of economic gain or loss. The horizontal dimension of a value chain instead includes all the systems components in which the value chain operates. That is the context in which it operates. Regulations are a key example of this, governance structures of how resources are managed. We have seen these components include government structures, dynamics among actors, power relations, and roles of specific population groups. Data collected during value chain mapping also allows understanding of constraints, barriers, and opportunities to build the resilience and sustainability of value chains. This information also includes information on the impact of climate change and drivers of change on the value chain. In this diagram, you can see how different things have been mapped out. And we will talk a bit more about how this can be done a bit later. This photo is an example of infrastructure destruction during a flooding event in an extreme storm in PNG. This impacted on the community's ability to access markets, but even impacted things like inputs to support recovery, which became very expensive. Understanding vulnerability can help develop interventions to support value chains. Resilience. The data that is needed to map a value chain is usually collected using different methods with what is called a mixed methods approach. Mixed method approaches are very effective to collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. Methods commonly used are secondary data research, individual interviews, key informant interviews, focus groups, workshops, and surveys. These methods are used to collect different types of information and vary according to the context. Using different methods during your analysis is also important to triangulation and verifying the information you collect with different actors, as well as any secondary data you may have. There are different data sources. Often starting with secondary data is useful if you do not know the value chain. This includes literature reviews, reports, internet searches, and government and business statistics. Once you have an idea on who to talk to, you can design different methods such as individual interviews, key informant interviews, focus group discussions, and surveys. You can also just start at one end of the value chain and use a snowballing technique. End market analysis is usually undertaken once the value chain mapping has been completed. This analysis allows producers to explore higher value end markets and make informed decisions on how to access those markets that offers the greatest benefit. Be aware that this end market analysis often requires expertise and knowledge, and if you want to add it to your analysis, you should recognize when to seek additional support. If the expertise is not available within your organization, you can seek it externally. Now I will talk you through the steps needed to undertake a value chain analysis for your project or your program. Of course, this is a general guideline, but you should always adapt the tool that I am presenting here to your project needs, resources, team, and capability. There are 4 key steps in mapping a value chain to generate interventions. Value chain maps are created during the first 3 steps, while in the 4th step, the root causes of barriers and constraints are identified and interventions are agreed upon. The first step when doing a value chain mapping is to gather data on the components of the vertical dimensions. Vertical mapping refers to the analysis of the entire process from the product of raw materials to the final product and delivery to the customer. It focuses on the different stages of the production process and the relationships between this type of mapping. As we have seen in previous slides, we should first identify the groups of actors involved in the value chain. Depending on the complexity of the value chain and whether the products are traded only locally or domestically, or whether they are also exported overseas, actors can include producers, processors, middlemen and traders, exporters and importers, wholesalers and end consumers. Concerned with understanding how value is added at each stage of the supply chain and identifying opportunities for improving efficiency and reducing costs or enhancing product quality. We should be able to identify each of these groups when undertaking interviews or surveys. In the process, we should also understand the value-adding activities conducted by each group of actors and the costs and expenses incurred by each group of actors. Last, during the step, it is also important to identify stakeholders' perceptions of various different disruptors on all the value chain activities. And this can include regulations, climate change, and social inclusion. Individual interviews are often used to collect these data from each group of actors along the value chain. A questionnaire is used and quantitative data is mainly collected at this stage. Usually the first actors to be interviewed are the producers, who can be identified by the community leaders or by talking to other community members. From there, the other actors to interview are identified through a snowballing sampling in which people interviewed provide referrals to recruit other actors to interview. In some cases, you can also start with other actors and work backwards and forwards to interview all the value chain actors. This also depends on who you know and where you think the entry point can be. At this stage, you can triangulate the information you collect with different actors, as well as with any secondary data you already have. For example, you can ask them about previous information you have collected or read about. The second step when doing a value chain mapping is to gather data on the components of the horizontal dimension, including socioeconomic, political systems, as well as legislation. Horizontal mapping focuses on the relationships and interactions across similar stages in the value chain, often within the same industry. It examines how companies within the same industry collaborate, compete, or share resources, and how these interactions affect the value chain. It can also examine how, within communities, collaboration and competition or resources are shared. As we have seen in previous slides, this means that we should collect data that allows us to understand the power relationships among actors and between actors and other stakeholders, and the governance structure and decision-making processes in which value chains operate. For this, you can use a governance mapping tool, and there is an example of this at the end of the slide pack on the SARA website. It is also important to understand the socio-economic context in which actors live, especially for producers who are often the focus of our interventions. During this step, we can also start collecting information on the barriers and constraints actors face. It is also very important to collect information on the opportunities actors may have, such as new markets, new product techniques, and so on. Apart from identifying stakeholders' perceptions of disruptors on the value chain activities, this step is important to understand the adaptive capacity of actors, especially the ones who are the focus of our projects and programs. When mapping the horizontal dimensions, we want to understand how the existing socioeconomic, political, and cultural systems prevent the actors from adapting to the changing conditions. We want to understand environmental constraints, and we want to identify opportunities to build on existing relationships and activities. We also want to understand how to build on existing and emerging markets. This can help us identify the gaps to meet the market needs. An example of this is the high-end sashimi for New York. French Polynesian government has been supporting companies develop high-end processing factories to meet this high-end market. That is very lucrative, but also very risky due to the sanitation requirements and short turnaround times for quality. Key informant interviews are usually used to collect this data from stakeholders who have knowledge of the value chain but are not necessarily directly involved. We normally call these agents and not actors. Among others, agents can be local or government officers who are in charge of regulating operations connected with the production and trade of the products. It can even be researchers who are knowledgeable. I believe many of you would be regarded as agents within the value chain. Agents are usually well informed on the issues and structure of the value chain, even though they are not directly involved in the activities. In this method, a question guide is used in which a list of open-ended questions is prepared to help direct the discussion with these key informants. Another method that is commonly used to map the value chain is focus group discussions. These are usually conducted to have a more in-depth understanding of the value chains, and they are conducted with specific groups such as women, youth, fishers or farmer, business councils. This method is generally used to follow up and validate information collected with other methods such as possible issues and strengths in existing value chains, new market opportunities and ideas, and potential incentives for change. Also in this method, a question guide is used in which a list of open-ended questions is prepared to help and direct discussions with participants. In the third step, we use data collected in the previous two steps to prepare a value chain map. The map, which is a visual representation of the value chain, is usually accompanied by statistical analysis of the quantitative data, such as prices and quantities, and a narrative that is a story about the value chain, which is inferred from the qualitative data collected. Here in this slide, there's an example of a value chain which CSIRO has mapped for a project in the Western province of PNG, which is looking at the illegal trade of wildlife products and the impact this is having on the natural resources in the region and the well-being of communities. The value chain products were shark fin, pêche de mar, and fish marl, which is the dried bladder of certain fish. The value chain map identified the actors along the value chain, the value-adding activities taking place along the chain, including who was involved in it, men and women, and youth, the flow of money along the legislative framework around the value chain. You can see that the products followed the same value chain from the producers in the village that were the fishers, mainly men, to the end consumers, who were people in the overseas countries, mainly Hong Kong, Vietnam, and China. As you can see, we use different icons to show different kinds of constraints, inefficiencies, barriers, and are identified in the value chain. This included the breach of regulations where wastage was occurring, informal taxation by traders, unsustainable fishing practices. The fourth step in the value chain seeks to understand the root causes of barriers and constraints, including those that have weakened the adaptive capacity of target actors, and agree on solutions to build the resilience and sustainability of value chains. This step is usually conducted during a participatory multi-stakeholder workshop, which brings together representatives of various actor groups, agents, and other relevant stakeholders. If you have the possibility, you can also invite to the workshop experts with specialized knowledge, including on fisheries, regulations, climate change, social inclusion, and other drivers of change, who can present scientific data about these drivers to help inform decision-making, which can build on the ability to make solutions that are more resilient. During the workshop, a causal loop analysis can be used. I will not go through the causal loop analysis here, but it can be found on the CSIRO website or with training activities on loan with ACFID. In brief, the value chain map produced in the previous step become the starting point for the activities and discussions throughout the sessions of the workshop. Value chain maps are used to describe the value chain and the system in which the value chain operates. Participants at the workshop are then asked to identify the main issues that prevent or enhance value chain sustainability and resilience. The issues are then grouped into main themes. A causal group loop analysis is then used to identify the linkages and feedback loops between each theme's root causes and symptoms. Lastly, solutions are identified and ranked and interventions agreed upon amongst the stakeholders. It is a fantastic way to create group buy-in and cohesion. If your focus is on climate change adaptation and value chain resilience, particular attention should be given to issues related to climate risks so that you can guide the participants. These include climate pressures, temperature, rainfall, flooding, extreme weather, drought, sea level rise, and the impacts on ecosystems which underpin production, impacts on storage and movement of goods, and impacts on infrastructure. So to summarize, a value chain analysis is an important tool that allows us to work with different stakeholders using a systems approach to integrate different types of knowledge into decisions on how to adapt better and build more resilient and sustainable value chains and trading activities, which are at the core of many community livelihoods and the economic development of Pacific nations. So here are some of the tools that can help you with your value chain analysis. CSIRO was funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to develop a knowledge broker support program. In that you will find trainings, so videos and case studies and tools around knowledge brokering in general, but also in terms of value chains, governance mapping, and causal loop analysis. These materials, especially the videos, can be found on Learn with ACFID, who we had a shared relationship with. This Knowledge Broker Support Program was specifically developed for the Pacific context, and the case studies provide interesting examples from Solomons to PNG of how value chains have been used. Another key tool that is very useful is Making Value Chains Work Better for the Poor. They have some good examples of tools and methodologies of things to do. And here are some additional references. There are many, many more on the internet, but these can give you some examples of things to think about, and especially around trade-offs around sustainability. So I'd like to thank you for your time today. I hope you have found this useful. Feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. Thank you. Bye.